if I remember correctly, I think when you left MS to go to code, they were like just starting out, if I recall. Like you were one of their first employees, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's right.
And so one question that I wanted to ask is when you were making that decision, like how did you think about that decision? Because I always tell my students that, hey, like at some point in your career, you're going to have to take some calculated risks, right? Like if you look at like all the really successful people that you admire or look up to, like at some point they had to take some risks too. And so like risk in and of itself is not like necessarily a bad thing. It's like how you evaluate those opportunities, and like any risk comes with like potential reward, right? And so a lot of people might look at what you did and say like, oh, you left Morgan Stanley Tech, which is very established, one of the top tech groups on the street, to go to this new bank that was also focused on tech, but it's like just starting out. And that can be viewed as risky, right? So like, how did you evaluate that decision, and what ultimately drove you to, make that jump, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not particularly risk loving by nature, but that was definitely something that I considered a pretty risky move at the time.
Yeah.
And some of it was just the desire to kind of like have certainty, because I didn't necessarily have a ton of options at that point in time. And some of it was maybe a little bit of like luck and intuition, I wasn't necessarily swimming in alternatives
Mm.
at that particular juncture. And so I think to kind of like backtrack from that a little bit, as Sam, like there was various recruiting cycles that started very quickly when we started our 2-year journey. And, I don't, and they're probably continuing to get pulled forward, for your comment earlier, but, I didn't have a background in finance. I didn't have a background in kind of like vocational work, if you will.
Yeah.
Our group, um, as you called out, is one of the best on Wall Street, and it attracted some of the best talent. And, what do you categorize as best talent, I think starts to get really diverse as you progress through your career. But you're early in your career, best talent is very quantifiable. It's, are you
Yeah.
good at Excel? Can you do a 3-statement model? Can you crank out slides, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. And so I did do the internship. So, that was a crash course and all those things.
Yeah.
But compared to, Sam, some of our peers who went to, UPenn or, other fantastic Ivy League schools where they were able to take effectively like these Wall Street prep courses,
Yeah.
I didn't really have that background.
Mm.
And when the private equity wave of recruiting hit, I didn't really know how to participate. And I took some conversations, but, they didn't really go anywhere. And so that wave kind of came and went, and I didn't necessarily have even conviction if that was something that was for me. I was just like participating because I saw everybody else participating. And so then that wave kind of came to a close. And now all of a sudden, probably for the first time in my life, you're like, well, there are all these possibilities available to you.
Yeah.
Which path do you take? And I spoke to, some big corporates. I remember I took an interview with like Salesforce, which, in retrospect didn't work out, but that could have been, really interesting because this was back in like 2009.
Mm.
And I spoke with like some venture capital firms, who didn't necessarily have like programs, but it was like opportunistic conversations.
Mm.
And, Paul Chamberlain, actually, if you recall, he was one of the most senior MDs, if not like a chairman of our group. Paul
Yeah.
Chamberlain introduced me to Quincy Smith, who is the founder of Code.
Mm.
And so and they courted me like quite aggressively because they were a startup and they needed to fill out their ranks. And so I remember Quincy, who's the founder of Code Advisors, he introduced me to some folks who are like legends in Silicon Valley. And I had no idea at the time, zero idea. I was meeting with these people who were like trying to convince me to work for Quincy. And I didn't even know what was happening to me. Like one of those people in particular is this guy, Peter Curry, legend in Silicon Valley. He was a CFO at Netscape.
Wow.
He was a board member at Twitter,
Okay.
and he is a big investor through his family office. And I think he was an advisor to like Index Ventures, one of the more successful venture capital firms. And so
Yeah.
I remember like meeting with Peter and asking him about Quincy, just like completely oblivious the stature of the person that I'm talking to. And there was a couple other examples like that. And so, somehow I my decision making led me to accept the offer between
Yeah.
like Paul Chamberlain vouching for this guy Quincy, between some of these conversations with people who were apparently incredible, but I had no idea. But they were convincing in their own right. And so
Yeah.
I took the leap. And it was pretty awesome. Because this was a startup bank, and because I had this like training ground of Morgan Stanley, I was able to really shine and
Yeah.
bring my best practices, et cetera, to them and kind of build their foundations.
Yeah.
And on top of that, what was really unique about Code Advisors is they found a niche that was unaddressed by bulge bracket banks.
Mm,
And the niche was acting as a capital advisor, or like an advisor for raising capital for these pre-IPO businesses.
mm,
And there was a big appetite from like the Fidelities of the world, from like Masons of the world, T. Rowe Prices of the world. There was an appetite for them to diversify some of their public portfolios with like late stage privates,
mm.
that were, had a line of sight into a public offering. And so it was like really right place, right time for Code Advisors. And I just got, you mentioned earlier in the intro, $1 billion of transaction value. It was intense. It was awesome. And it was like raw, because you're not working with, oftentimes I wasn't working with a CFO. I was working with like the founder, who maybe had like maybe a VP of finance at best.
Yeah.
And so I was really able to bring a lot of value and get these transactions done.
That's awesome, man. I mean, just a couple of thoughts on everything you just said. So much to unpack there, but whether it's the private equity on-cycle recruiting process, because I went through that as well, and similar to you, I gotta say, I was like, I just didn't know much about it. I didn't know how everything worked. I didn't know the timeline. It kind of just happened, and I was caught totally off guard. I didn't know how important the headhunter conversations were. I thought they were my friends and just trying to help me, which like in hindsight is like so naive, right? And I just like didn't take, I just wasn't ready for that process. And I had no one in my family or around me who could even tell me that kind of stuff. And even like your story about meeting Quincy or not knowing like who he was introducing to you and all those things, like I can relate to so much of that, which is just like when you're younger, there's just a lot of times you don't even know what's going on and you're just trying to like make the best decisions you can about your career. And sometimes some of it is like you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, the right opportunity, but you still have to like step into it and like take the opportunity when it's presented to you, right?